In this movie, we'll take a look at a specific option associated with the Select and Mask workspace known as Decontaminate Colors. Now, back in the old days of the Refine Mask command, by which I mean the years through and including 2014, you used to be able to adjust the amount of color decontamination. But when Adobe converted Refine Mask into the Select and Mask workspace, that function was lost to us. Now it has been thankfully restored. And so what we're going to do is get rid of these highlight edges around our skydivers. And so notice if I were to shift click on a layer mask thumbnail here inside the layers panel in order to turn that layer mask off, we originally had a very bright background. And now if I shift click on that layer mask thumbnail again to turn it back on, you can see that a kind of light edge persists. And we have these little pockets of highlight at some of the corners, including the areas inside the fingers of this guy's hand. And so what we want to do is get rid of those edges using, in part, that Decontaminate Colors option. And we'll also apply a few blending adjustments in order to create this final effect here, in which the divers seem more integrated with their outer space background. All right, so I'll go ahead and switch over to the image at hand. You want to make sure that the top layer is selected, at which point go up to the Select menu and choose the Select and Mask command, which will switch you over to the Select and Mask workspace. Notice that my view option is set to on layers so that I can see the outer space image in the background. Edge detection is also twirled open. So I'll just go ahead and take that radius value up to 5 pixels, which is that same value I used in the previous movie, and it happens to work well for sharply defined smooth edges, as we have in this image here. And so notice, because these guys are wearing these hats, whatever they're called, we don't have a bunch of wispy hair trailing into the background. All right, but we still have these edges, which is no good whatsoever. And so I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in on one of these edges like so. And then I'll twirl open this guy right here, Output Settings. And if you can't quite see it, then you can just go ahead and twirl this guy, Global Refinements, closed, like so. Then twirl this one open, and you'll see this checkbox right here. I'll go ahead and turn that checkbox on, at which point all those edges disappear. But notice, if I were to switch over to the hand, it's in pretty darn rough shape. And so this is how things look without that Decontaminate Colors checkbox turned on, and this is how things look now. Now, I want you to notice that as soon as you turn on Decontaminate Colors, this Output 2 option switches from Layer Mask to New Layer with Layer Mask, and that's because Photoshop has to rewrite the colors of those pixels. All right, now, I still need some of this gook to go away here, so armed with my Refine Edge brush tool, I'll go ahead and paint inside these regions as carefully as I can. So I want to work with a small brush, and you can see why. As soon as I start painting inside these areas, I go ahead and get rid of the bright regions of sky, as you're seeing me do right here, but I also mess up the colors inside the gloves. Now, one way to fight that recoloring is to reduce this amount value, which, as I say, has been restored in the most recent version of the software. And so if I were to take it down to, let's say, 38%, the gloves end up looking a lot better, but we still have those bad edges around the sharply defined details. I don't want that, so I'll go ahead and split the difference by taking the amount value up to 77%. Now, that is going to mess up those glove colors, and you can make that a little better by pressing the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac, so you're seeing a minus sign inside that circular brush cursor, at which point you can go ahead and paint, and that's going to give you slightly less in a way of that so-called color decontamination. All right, so I'll go ahead and paint in a few other areas right there. And again, I'm pressing the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac as I paint. Notice we have this kind of bad stuff going on inside the elbow. So I'll go ahead and Alt or Option paint that away. This needs to go away, so I'll just go ahead and click. Don't have the Alt key or the Option key down this time around. And notice that does a brilliant job of getting rid of that little bit of background. The shoe's a mess, but we're going to have to fix that manually by painting directly inside the layer mask. We got some problems right here, so I'll just click and drag like so in order to paint these regions away. And I'm not really painting things away, by the way. I'm just telling Photoshop to readdress these details. And now I'm going to press the right bracket key a few times in order to make my brush bigger. And I'll go ahead and paint between these green legs right here in order to paint that area of background away. Again, I'm asking for Photoshop's help in this region. This shoe's a mess, but I'm not going to bring it back inside this workspace. We have a problem with this toe as well. I'm going to leave it alone, however, and I'm going to scroll over to this region right here. I'll reduce the size of my cursor by pressing the left bracket key, and I'll go ahead and paint inside that region, and then I'll just click right there in order to make that little bit of blue sky go away. We've got some other areas that you might want to attend to just by clicking inside of them, like so. So it's totally up to you how thorough you want to be. At this point, things look pretty good, however, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK in order to apply those settings, and notice that I am now returned to Photoshop proper, at which point I have a new copy of this layer. And so if I were to scroll over to this glove and zoom into it a little bit, you can see that the colors of these pixels have been rewritten. And so I'll just go ahead and shift click on this layer mask thumbnail to turn it off so you can see just what Decontaminate Colors looks like. So it's not always a pretty sight, but it can be highly beneficial, and it's a great thing that we can now adjust the amount value. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and shift click on that layer mask to turn it back on. And you can see if you turn that original layer back on and then turn the top layer off, that you still have those original colors if for some reason you decide you need to bring them back. And that's why Photoshop goes ahead and makes a copy of the layer, because anytime you apply Decontaminate Colors, you are applying a destructive modification. All right, so I'll go ahead and turn that top layer on, turn the middle layer off, and I'll zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to scroll down to this shoe right here, and I'll go ahead and grab my brush tool, which you can get by pressing the B key. And if I right click, you can see that my hardness is set to 100%, at which point I'll make sure my foreground color is white. And you can do that just by tapping the D key for the default colors. Make sure the layer mask is selected there in the layers panel. Just go ahead and drag up like so in order to restore that little bit of shoe. And I'm going to drag across this bit of shoe as well. I could go nuts if I want to. I could spend a long time in this image, but I'm just going to paint in the tips of the shoes and nothing more. All right, now press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to center my zoom. Now, at this point, we have a pretty darn good mask. It's not perfect, of course. The problem is they look like they're being lit on Earth as opposed to in space. And so I decided things would look a little more credible if I were to change the blend mode in the top left corner of the layers panel from normal to the final item, luminosity, to create this effect here. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit. And then I decided there should be some harsh light hitting them at the top here and some harsh shadows at the bottom. And you can kind of fake that effect by dropping down to the FX icon and choosing bevel and emboss. And these are the settings I came up with. Mostly, these are default settings, by the way. Style set to inner bevel, depth 100%. But I took the size up to 10 pixels, so slightly higher than default. And I set the angle value to 90 degrees so that the light is coming straight down from above. An altitude of 30 degrees is just fine. Notice that I've cranked the highlight mode opacity value up to 77%. By default, it's 50. I left the shadow mode alone, at which point I'll click OK to accept that change. And now, just so we can take in the final effect, I'll press Shift F to switch to the full screen mode, and then I'll go ahead and zoom in a bit as well. And so, for the sake of comparison here, this is the masked image that we saw at the outset of the movie. Pretty rough, but pretty darn good, considering that all we had to do was choose the subject command from the select menu. And this is the final effect, which required a little bit of additional work, including a contribution from the Decontaminate Colors checkbox, complete with its restored amount value, here inside the most recent version of Photoshop CC.